In a case of the morning after the chaotic night before, I find myself recording an introduction to the talk I gave last night, Tuesday the 8th of October. The recording that was made of my talk did not include Matt's introduction to it to explain the circumstances, so I thought I'd briefly do that and also mention how the recording you're about to see differs from the talk I actually gave. We were due to have a presentation by an external speaker on deer. Unfortunately, he had computer problems and had to pull out at the last minute. So I got a text from Martin at about 6:10 saying, "Oops, could you, Tim, put a couple of slides together just to talk about something impromptu?" And I agreed. What I had in mind at the time was that you've already seen my hour-long presentation on the flora and fauna of the Upper Engadine Valley in Switzerland, which is one of the places that I visited in Europe this summer. But as I'd also visited Albania, Turkey, France, and Greece, I thought, well, I'll just pick some highlights out of that and talk about them. One thing that was in the back of my mind was that I take hundreds and thousands of photographs, not simply of wildlife, but of other subjects in which I'm interested in, such as archaeological sites, and museums, and as well as friends and family and all that sort of stuff. And that I usually spend the winter sifting through the photographs, identifying the best ones, and above all, identifying the species in them. So, of course, I hadn't done that, but I thought, I'll just pick a few together and stick them on some slides. So in about 40 minutes, I had time to have my dinner and put a few slides together. But it was very rushed, and thus it's a very rough presentation. I should add that, of course, putting together a presentation takes considerably longer, even if I'm just picking out a few photos. You still have to go through the hundreds of photos to find the ones you want, and so there was no way in the end that I was going to find highlights from those 4 countries altogether. As it was, I'd started from Albania and I got about 2/3 of the way through the photographs I'd taken of Albania before I ran out of time and had to give the talk. So actually this has turned into a talk about the wildlife of Albania, or at least some of it. I also gave the caveat which Matt mentioned in his introduction, that I hadn't completed the identifications and I welcomed any comments or suggestions. And I'm grateful to Matt and to Martin for their input. So as a result of that and of some work that I've done after I gave the talk, there is actually quite a number of additional identifications, a correction or two, and a longer segment which I've dubbed in with a discussion about a wheatear that I found, which is not totally conclusive, but anyhow. So please excuse how rough and ready this is, but I hope I've made some improvements, at least to the identifications in it, and I hope you enjoy it.
Then it occurred to me, who do we know that hasn't got much to do? And I thought, well, Tim never has much to do, so I sent him a panicky text message. Could you throw something together, Tim? And of course, he's risen to the occasion. So I'll introduce Tim. Please give a big hand to our saviour, Tim Arnold.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. You haven't seen what I produced yet. Right. So once I got this, it was a rather interesting evening. I had about 3/4 of an hour in which to start putting together this presentation and have dinner. And I've got here, and I've turned into Paul Martin Ferns, who's ill today, so I've had to set up the audio as well. And finish, but not finished, but anyhow, this is a presentation, and it was intended to be about the overseas wildlife has seen this summer, excluding Switzerland, which you've already seen, it's actually some of the wildlife I saw in Albania specifically, because I've only got about 2/3 of the way through my photographs of Albania before I've run out of time to put this together. So you're not going to see any wildlife of Turkey or of Greece, where I also was this summer. Thank you, Martin. So with that, it's Albania. It's very rough. I haven't done any editing on the photos. As Matt said, I think it was. There's a couple of things in here I haven't yet identified because it was one of my projects through the winter. Here we go. Albania. So it's on the Adriatic coast. We went in late May, so it's a good time of year. We went for a cultural archaeological tour of about 10 days. So wildlife was not the subject, but Marigold and I always like going on the archaeological tours to Mediterranean countries in March, April, May, because you've got these archaeological sites which are often open fields with bits of crumbly walls in, and fantastic time for flowers, for, if you go early enough, some of the migrating birds or local breeding birds, butterflies, a little bit later in the season. So it's always a good time. And we actually had mostly good weather, except we got caught in one of the thunderstorms. This was actually after I got back to our hotel on, I think, the first night, drenched, but lovely sun, rainbow there. And the reason I'm putting this in is to set the scene for everything's green and growing, and it was cherry season, and it's all good season. Now the Albania, of course, has been through a pretty mixed history, to put it mildly, but it is full of flowers. It's not agriculturally, it's not intensively farmed by any means. So there's more flowers in fields and verges and so on, as well as here in walls and some of the places we went. You see much more raw farming. Here's a couple of shepherds waiting. It's only part of their flock. This is snapped from the bus as we drove past, but they're waiting to get their flock across the field. And of course, they have all the latest modern technology for agricultural equipment. So that's just sort of setting the scene. And I'll start from the wildlife point of view, actually start somewhere very different, with some amphibians, or reptiles as well. So I think this very fuzzy thing at the top is a fire salamander, but I'll take offers on that. It was shot out. We called in for a loo break at a petrol station, and I was looking out of the coach window, and down by the curb there was this thing flopping around, and I think it's a fire salamander, but as I say, I'm not 100% sure of that, and that's not the greatest shot, but it was on a fairly long zoom and through a window. I'm also not certain which lizard this is. I haven't had a chance to be through all the photographs yet, so I haven't identified this particular lizard. And elsewhere we saw terrapins, so lots of different things. So butterflies. We start with some of the butterflies that we might see at home. Meadow brown, rather nice looking marbled white. Because we're out in these archaeological sites, as I say, they're open areas. A lot of them are on the top of a hill, because that's in classical times, for defensive reasons. They often build their towns at the top of the hill. So you get these lovely flowery fields. Plenty of butterflies. And we also see some of the species that we're familiar with at home, as I say, meadow brown or marbled white. But also, I think that's a silverwash fritillary. I'm not too familiar with the underside of silver watch fritillary, but I'm reasonably confident. And a cream spot tiger, I think, which is a day-flying moth.
Another species we find in the UK is the common blue, and here I found one in Albania. It's a female. This particular female, like some of them, has just a little bit of bluey violet on the leading edge of the forewing, near the on the inner section near the abdomen. Many females are just all brown with the orangey luneals, but this one has that little bit of bluey violet. Now, there are other species that I found of butterfly in Albania that we don't find in the UK.
We're familiar with the comma here. This is its cousin, the southern comma. There are lots and lots of these butterflies flying around. Spotted fritillary, what shall I say, the more fancy-looking version of it on the right, and the other version of it, which is I still actually quite an interesting but overall duller appearance, I suppose. Also found a couple of. Did I skip a slide? No, it must be coming up somewhere. I've also found a few species I've not seen before. This is a moth, and this entire family is one that we don't find in Britain. I'm afraid I couldn't get a very good shot of it. It's a tiny little thing. For those who know their sort of small skippers and Essex skippers, it's about that kind of size. So let's say an inch long-ish. But it's a member of the Thyrididae, which, as I say, is a family you don't have. Its English name, and actually it's also basically the same name in French, is the pygmy, I suppose, because it's a small moth, but it's not an especially small moth. If you think it's a butterfly, it's day flying, then it's, I suppose, a smallish butterfly, if you will look at it that way. Pyrus fenestrella, the pygmy. Fenestrella means window, because those white patches are actually semi-transparent and you can half see through the wings. And it puzzled me when I found it in Albania, because I've never seen it before. And lo and behold, one turned up when I was mothing in a wood one night in France. So, and that's the one in France is only the second record for the département. So that was nice to see. Whoops. Sometimes your chance of seeing things, you just sort of see some movement out of the corner of your eye. This is one of these cases. This is actually below. There is a wall with a sort of slightly jutting out course of the wall at about shin level. And I just noticed something flitting underneath. And I think it had been disturbed, and this is a moth that had been disturbed and was trying to find somewhere else quick to hide and spend the rest of the day. It's an extraordinarily worn specimen, so I'm not totally sure of its species, but this is just one of these chance observations while we're sort of walking past looking at crumbling walls, as it were. Species we do get, so I was trying to organize these and they haven't necessarily perfectly ordered, is a species of moth in the UK, the bright wave, which was, just in the same area, wandering around in the grassland. Moving on from butterflies, I wonder when I had a giant reed moth somewhere, but it's not turned up, so never mind. Out on these sites, they're high. Of course, it can get quite warm. And we're walking past these ancient pre-Hellenic stone walls, big lumps of barely dressed stone. And I noticed these little accretions on the wall, which are made by taking tiny little bits of mud and sticking them onto the stone with a small entry-exit hole that you can see on the top one. And it's a spider hunting wasp. I actually saw, I didn't managed to get them in a photograph, but I did actually see the wasps coming in out of these little things, and they're part of the pompilid, the spider hunting wasps. Meanwhile, sitting nearby was this strikingly marked beetle. I haven't got it to species level, but it's one of the blister beetles. And this is in a slightly different place, but again, next at an archaeological site. That's actually an early church nearby, and out in the rather rough grass around it was these beetles. Crickets, well, one is pretty easy to do. The great green bush cricket is a common species, and it's a whacking great thing. It's 3 inches long, possibly even 4. Pretty good. The other one I haven't managed to identify, but it's probably one of the bush crickets. So that was some of the insects. I'm just going to close, and I'm sorry this is so brief, but it's what there is. Some of the bird life.
So now we get to the wheat ears, which is quite a complicated situation. There are these days 2 species of black-eared wheatear, the eastern and the western black-eared. Now, the western is not found in Albania. The eastern has less buff on its chest. You can see the one on the right has some buff on its chest, and that's fine. It's an eastern black-eared wheatear. The western flavour tends to have rather less buff than that. But there's also variations within each of those species, particularly in the amount of black on the so-called ear. And in extreme examples, the most of the head becomes quite black. The black band, the bandit band around the eyes and ears, if you like, becomes very thick. And then, of course, there's also the pied wheatear, and its very close cousin, the cypress wheatear. The pied wheatear is basically black and white, as you'd expect from its name, with no buff. So if we look at the wheatear on the left, I actually have 2 or 3 photographs of this, and I can't see any buff on its chest, which might suggest that it's a pied wheatear. And indeed, doesn't appear, and it's a poor angle, but it doesn't appear that there's any clear separation between the black area on its wing and the black area on its head, which in a black-eared wheatear, there would still be a white band around the neck going all the way around, which would separate the 2 areas, even in the extreme examples. So that would make it a pied wheatear, except that I can't find any records of pied wheatear in Albania. So the one on the left is a bit of a mystery. Have I accidentally photographed the only pied wheatear to have been seen in Albania? Who knows?
Albania is a destination for wildlife holidays, especially for birds. I should have said in my intro that it's the coast, which is on the west side of the country, therefore on the east side of the Adriatic. The coast is, it's obviously low and flat, and you've got places where there are some salt marshes and things like that. So you've got a fairly flattish bit, and then you rise up to the spine of the country, in the east, which is principally limestone mountains, and typically sort of mountain sceneries, and it's quite dry and hot and so on. So from a birding perspective, and indeed from wildlife in general, you have a very substantial variety of habitats, marshes, arable and grassland and mountain areas. So it's actually quite rich in this. And the Albanians are just starting to do some projects to drive tourism and interest in wildlife. So there's some a few information boards up about it. This is another shot out of a bus as we're driving by. So sorry, it's a bit fuzzy. The giveaway was, well, first of all, there's this vertical cliff with lots of holes in it, and there are white patches. White patches is a form of what comes out the back end of a bird. And I looked a bit more closely, and again, this is with my camera on maximum zoom. Low me down, it's a bee-eater colony. So very nice to see that. By one of the main roads. Some birds we're used to. No particular reason for including these, but just to say some of the species are familiar. Greenfinch and a male stonechat. Sorry. That's my last slide. I thought I had one more. Anyhow, so well worth a visit. There were more things I did see. I just haven't had a chance to put the slides together. That's all. Did manage to do 22, I see. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tim. Oh, putting that together in about 5 minutes flat, that's fantastic. Has anyone else been to Albania at all? I was interested because in Croatia, which is not that far from Albania, one of the commonest moths everywhere are cream spot tigers.
Oh, really?
I've never seen so many. So seeing that one there.
Well, of course, I mean, they do exist in this country, but they're fairly rare.
Yeah. That's lovely to see that one.
So, yes.
Yeah. And anyone thought about the wheatear at all? I'm wondering if it was actually a pied wheatear, because the Cyprus wheatear is a version of the pied wheatear. So it could be.
You're right. Yes,
yeah.
It could well have been a pied.
Yeah, I think it probably was actually.
Yes.
Yeah, lovely.
Oh,
very nice to see.
Yeah. Yeah.
So obviously got some things there.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyone got any questions for Tim at all? Go on, there must be some. What about movement around? I take it you're fairly free to move and drive around with binoculars and telescopes and cameras?
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure what Jenny's showing us. It's totally out of focus, I'm afraid, Jenny. And we haven't got your sound turned up, so.
It's muted.
We're getting everyone tonight.
moving around. So long as you don't point your camera at a military base, you're basically fine. Obviously, it's had a troubled history in the past, and with all kinds of things. One of the archaeological sites that we went to, which wasn't of particular interest for wildlife, was actually it's a classical village, I suppose you'd say, from pre-Roman times, and it's on still currently officially a naval base. There's an awful lot of abandoned facilities in Albania, whether military facilities or industrial facilities, an awful lot of them, but it's still officially a naval site. And it's only recently been opened up. We turned up as a coach load, and you go to the sentry gate, and what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to fill in a 1-page form with the passport details and all the other information for each visitor. So if we were a coach load, and I can't remember how we were, 20-ish, they're supposed to fill in 24. So he basically did 4 pages and said, that's it, off you go. It's in the time of Enver Hoxha, there was a lot of, Albania had to defend itself. So they fell out with just about all the communist nations as well, one by one, of the rest of Yugoslavia and China and this, that, and the other. So with their paranoia, they built an awful lot of concrete bunkers, which is basically a little circular thing about, 3 meters round, with a concrete domed roof. And they're prefabricated because they built thousands of these things. Well, they're not needed anymore, so they've gradually been dismantling them. And at this place, which was a naval base, as a breakwater, they used all the lids of these bunkers. And so there's an entire, Marigold has a photograph of it, she sneaked a photograph on the coach as we drove past, hoping that we wouldn't get arrested. So we have this photograph of this bunker graveyard acting as a breakwater. So basically, it's easy to get around, just don't photograph military facilities.
Yeah. The accursed mountains.
Thank you. Yep.
We got that, Jenny. Well done. Hi, Viola. Anyone else would like to ask something? One moment.
Thank you. I was wondering if you, what the grass spurges are like. Are they grass? Are they manicured? Are they wildflowers on the roads?
They are generally most of the area is pretty unimproved, which from a nature point of view was a good idea. Agriculture is fairly primitive, mostly. There are some areas where it's intensifying rapidly. There's a lot of, roads are fairly fluid. Some of the minor roads, exactly where the road ends and the mud and the debris and the verge and everything else begins is a little bit vague, let's say. One of the things we noticed is when I flew into Krakow in Poland, it must be 20 years ago, as we're coming into land, what was remarkable in around Poland at that time was all of the tiny strips of fields. The Poles had the same system as the French used to have, or sort of still officially do before the World War, which was where if you died and you had two children, and then each got half your fields, and then when they died, their children got. So you've got things salami sliced. Everybody's farming largely with just horses for power, of course. These tiny little fields, and parts of Albania look just like that.
Anything else? Oh, yeah. One moment.
Chris.
Hello. Do you
Sorry
want
to put
to
a downer on it, but I read
the stand
recently that there are
sites?
plans for a massive tourist development on the coast, possibly including a new airport. I don't know if you know anything about that.
Yes. I'm not sure about the airport.
I might have made that one up, but
I wouldn't. It's more than plausible. One of the problems is a lot of projects get started in Albania and never finished. They are really growing tourism. The Mediterranean coast of Albania go back to Spain in the 1960s and 70s. It's going to go through a massive growth. We stayed in one resort where there were photographs we went in the museum. We were the people in the museum, and they had photographs of the little tiny little fishing harbour, and how this whole place is now just they're high-rise hotels all over the place. Albania's going through that. We arrived, it happened that our plane landed at the same time as an EasyJet and a Ryanair or something like that, and we were on BA. I worked out that in those 20 minutes, because we had then a big queue for immigration, I worked out in those 20 minutes, as many people had arrived at Tirana Airport as came as foreign visitors to Albania in the whole of, Marigold tell me, I think it's 1985 or something. So in 20 minutes now. So it's going through this huge growth. The rule of law is not as solid as it might be. Albania has a massively falling population because everybody's emigrated for work. So they're keen to get as much industry and stuff going. It's not always done straight down the line, let's say. So, but they are trying to grow these facilities, so it wouldn't surprise me that there's a lot of development going on. Yes, definitely. Di had a question, I think.
No, I'm just saying, I've got a few pictures here of Kaziranga if you want them.
Oh, thank you. But we'll follow up.
Does anyone have any other questions at all? No. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon, Joe.
Tim, thanks for all that. Just going back to the start of your talk, and I didn't take it in sufficiently. Were you with a group or were you travelling independently?
We were with a group. It was a group organised by Ace Cultural Tours, and it was a group. I think we were about 20ish. I can't remember now. with a sort of slant of looking at the history, archaeology, and a bit of the culture. But I know there are more than there's a number of companies also run nature tours there, but you can perfectly easily go yourself as under your own steam as an independent traveller.
And a sort of related question. I mean, is it? It won't be cheap, but is it a less expensive country to visit than some others now? It's certainly less expensive than Switzerland, I hope.
Yes, it's cheaper than most. Touristy things are less cheap than what the locals might pay for food and so on, but it's still comparatively cheap, which is one of the problems why it's driving an awful lot of this beach tourism.
Yeah.
Is, if you've been to Ibiza 17 times, now it's time to go to somewhere cheaper, Albania.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. What's the wildlife groups, Tim? Because I know when I went to Croatia in 2017, I was looking for one specific bird, but we found quite a few there, which we handed on to the Croatian bird authorities, if you like, because there wasn't just one. There were a number of different societies recording birds. And I think we had 4 or 5 first records for the country. So I assume it's probably the same for Albania now. You would be finding things there and discovering moths and butterflies and plants that probably no one else has ever recorded there.
I would guess so. By pure chance, I met as far as I know, professor of, I think she's professor of entomology at Tirana University when we were there. The tour lead, ACE, do this thing of they try and give something back to the place they're going to and do cultural exchanges and all kinds of things. And the tour leader, whose last tour it was, had been there, I don't know, 20 years ago and had been looking for things, and he'd met this person who was at that point an early, I think she was still looking to do a PhD. And so they supported her with a grant and so on, took her, she studied in, I don't remember where she studied, but anyhow, so he was meeting up with her again. Now she's later in her career. So they have but she says there is so little infrastructure there. So when she applied for a grant to go and collect insects from around Albania, some places in Albania that had been unrecorded, the answer was back, well, yeah, we'll pay for your, I can't remember which way around it was, we'll pay for your hotel meals or accommodation meals, but you'll have to pay for, your car and petrol and all the other things, but that's all the money there is, so
yes,
there's very, very little. I would imagine Albania is a very under-recorded country for wildlife.
Yes, I would have thought so. Does anyone else have any more questions for Tim? Tim, that was really fascinating. Thank you very much.